Agent Gray stood outside the coffee shop, adjusting their human disguise one final time. The mimic skin felt uncomfortable, but their superiors had assured them it was perfect down to the last pore. They had spent 3 months studying human behavior through remote observation, and now it was time for direct infiltration. The small coffee shop in downtown Seattle seemed like the perfect observation post. Humans gathered there regularly to exchange information while consuming their caffeine-based stimulants. The bell chimed as they pushed open the door. The rich smell of coffee beans filled the air, along with the sound of quiet chatter and soft music playing from hidden speakers. Agent Gray had memorized the proper protocols. Approach counter, order beverage, find seat, observe. Simple. Hey there, welcome to Daily Grind. The voice belonged to a human male with bright eyes and an even brighter smile. His name tag read Tom. First time here. Never seen you before, and I know most of our regulars. Agent Gray felt a moment of panic. Their research hadn't indicated humans could detect newcomers so easily. Yes, first time, they replied, keeping their words short to minimize risk of error. Well then, you're in for a treat. Tom leaned forward slightly, his enthusiasm seemingly genuine. Any idea what you'd like? Our house blend is pretty amazing, but if you're feeling adventurous, I just made a fresh batch of our Ethiopian light roast. Agent Gray struggled to process the multiple options. Their research had suggested coffee was a single beverage. House blend, they said stiffly, remembering to add, please. Coming right up. So what brings you to this part of town? We're kind of off the beaten path, but that's what makes us special, you know. The alien spy froze for a microsecond. This wasn't part of the expected transaction protocol. I'd work nearby, they replied, using their prepared cover story. Oh yeah, where at? The new office building on 7th. Tom was already preparing the coffee with practiced movements. They'd been putting up a lot of new construction around here lately. Kind of weird how fast they're building everything, if you ask me. Agent Gray felt their heart rate accelerator increase speed. The new buildings were part of their species' preliminary invasion infrastructure. Consulting, they manage, avoiding the direct question. Consulting, huh? Must be interesting work. Tom smiled, sliding the coffee across the counter. That'll be $3.75. Hey, you should meet Barbara. She comes in around 10 most days. She used to work as a librarian, but now she does some consulting too. Always has the most interesting observations about what's going on around town. Agent Gray handed over the correct amount of human currency, which they had carefully prepared. Thank you, they said, ready to retreat to a safe observation distance. Hold up, you haven't told me your name yet. Can't properly welcome a new regular without knowing their name, right? The alien felt trapped. Gray, they said, using their designation as it seemed adequately human-like. Gray, like the color. That's cool. You know, speaking of gray, these clouds we've been having lately are something else. Never seen weather patterns quite like this before. Almost like someone's controlling the weather, right? Tom laughed. Agent Gray nearly dropped their coffee. The atmospheric processors weren't supposed to be noticeable to humans. Weather is unpredictable, they offered weakly. Tell me about it. Anyway, don't be a stranger, Gray. The morning crew here is like family. We look out for each other, share stories, keep each other updated on all the little things happening around town. That's what makes this place special. Agent Gray found an empty table in the corner, their mind racing. The mission parameters hadn't prepared them for this level of social interaction. How did humans manage to exchange so much information so quickly? And why did this Tom human seem so interested in every detail? As they sipped their coffee, which was surprisingly pleasant, they watched Tom greet each new customer with the same enthusiasm, asking questions, sharing observations, creating connections. It was chaotic, inefficient, and completely fascinating. What Agent Gray didn't realize was that they had just experienced their first dose of human small talk. the most powerful intelligence-gathering tool humanity had never intentionally created. 3 days into their observation mission, Agent Gray had established what they believed to be a safe routine. They would arrive at the coffee shop at 9:15 a.m., order the house blend from Tom, and spend exactly 2 hours monitoring human interactions. What they hadn't counted on was Tom's remarkable memory and persistent friendliness. "Morning, Gray," the usual. Tom was already reaching for a cup when Agent Gray approached the counter. "You picked a weird time to start coming here. You know that. These clouds are something else." Agent Gray glanced up at the gray-purple sky outside, a side effect of the atmospheric processors preparing Earth's atmosphere for the invasion force. "The weather is different," they agreed cautiously. "Different is putting it mildly." A new voice joined the conversation. An elderly woman with sharp eyes and a red scarf settled onto the stool next to the counter. "Barbara," she said, extending her hand to Gray. "Tom's told me you're in consulting too." Agent Gray shook her hand, remembering to apply exactly 2.3 seconds of pressure to appear natural. "Yes, consulting." "Well, these weather patterns are certainly giving me something to consult about," Barbara chuckled, accepting her own coffee from Tom. "Did you know I've been keeping a weather diary for the past 20 years? Never seen anything like this. The clouds move in perfect geometric patterns now, almost like they're being directed." Agent Gray's mimic skin felt suddenly too tight. The atmospheric processors weren't supposed to be this obvious. "Perhaps it is climate change," they suggested, using a common human excuse. "Nah, this is different," Tom joined in, leaning on the counter. "My brother works at the weather station up north. Says their instruments are picking up weird energy readings. Can't explain it. And have you noticed how it's the same temperature everywhere in the city now? Down to the exact degree." The construction sites, another regular customer called out from his table. "They all went up right before this started. My cousin's a contractor. Says the materials they used aren't like anything he's seen before." Agent Gray felt their anxiety levels rising. How were these humans noticing so much? Their species had spent years developing the perfect concealment protocols. "Oh, that reminds me." Barbara turned back to Gray, her eyes twinkling. "Since you're in consulting, have you heard anything about those new buildings? The ones that went up overnight practically. My granddaughter works in city planning. Says there's no proper paperwork for any of them." "I am not familiar with those projects," Agent Gray managed, clutching their coffee cup slightly too tightly. "Really? Could have sworn I saw you coming out of one yesterday," Tom said cheerfully, wiping down the counter. "The one with those weird antenna things on top. Speaking of which, nobody's seen any birds around those buildings. Kind of strange, right?" The coffee shop had grown quieter, more customers tuning into the conversation. Agent Gray realized with horror that their carefully chosen observation post had become a hub of inadvertent intelligence gathering. "Must be mistaken," they said quickly. "I should go. Work calls." "But you just got here," Tom called after them. "And you haven't heard about the lights yet. My sister saw these weird blue flashes coming from those buildings last night. Kind of like your eyes do sometimes when you're startled, Gray." Agent Gray practically ran from the coffee shop, their mission report already forming in their mind. How had they missed this? These humans, with their endless chatter and seemingly pointless observations, were unknowingly piecing together the entire invasion infrastructure. Back in the coffee shop, Barbara sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Interesting fellow, that Gray. Reminds me of those documents I used to archive at the library about potential extraterrestrial behavior patterns." "You think?" Tom grinned, already preparing another customer's order. "Well, whatever they are, they make great coffee shop conversation. Though someone should tell them that their skin shouldn't shimmer like that when they're nervous." The morning crowd chuckled, continuing their casual exchange of observations, unaware that their simple small talk had just sent an alien spy into panic mode. The perfectly geometric clouds continued their slow dance overhead, now drawing more curious glances than ever before. Agent Gray sat stiffly in their corner table, trying to look busy with the newspaper while their enhanced hearing monitored every conversation in the daily grind. After yesterday's close call, they had considered abandoning this observation post, but their superiors insisted they maintain their position to avoid raising suspicion. "Hey, Gray, your usual is ready," Tom called out cheerfully. "And you've got to hear what Bill from the construction crew found yesterday." Moving to the counter with practiced casualness, Agent Gray accepted their coffee. "Found?" they asked, immediately regretting engaging. A burly man in a hard hat turned on his stool. "Yeah, I was telling Tom here about these weird metal boxes we found while digging the foundation for that new tower on 12th Street. Never seen anything like it. All smooth, no seams, and kind of humming." Agent Gray's fingers tightened around their cup. The resonance generators weren't supposed to be discovered for another 3 months. "Sounds like those things my daughter found near the lake," another customer chimed in. She was a park ranger, Agent Gray recalled from previous conversations. "We thought they were some kind of scientific equipment at first, but none of the universities claimed them." Speaking of strange finds, Barbara walked in, right on schedule. "Remember those weird antenna towers we were discussing? My friend Janet, she's an amateur radio operator, says they're putting out some kind of signal. Keeps interfering with her equipment." Tom leaned forward, clearly interested. "What kind of signal?" "That's the thing." Barbara settled into her usual spot. "It's not like anything she's ever heard before. Says it sounds almost, well, she said it sounds like whales singing, but in perfect mathematical patterns." Agent Gray felt their mimicked skin growing cold. Those were the coordination signals for the atmospheric processors. Mathematical patterns. A quiet man in the corner spoke up. Agent Gray recognized him as a local math teacher. "Like the cloud formations we were talking about yesterday." "Exactly." Barbara beamed. "I was hoping you'd be here, Steve. I brought some of Janet's signal recordings. Thought you might want to take a look at the wavelength patterns." Agent Gray watched in horror as Barbara pulled out a tablet, and several customers gathered around. This was exactly what their superiors had feared. Humans sharing information across different fields of expertise. "You know what's really weird?" Tom said while preparing another coffee. "All these strange things started happening right around the time those new consulting firms moved in. No offense, Gray." "None taken," Agent Gray managed, edging toward the door. "Hold up, Gray," Tom called out. "You haven't heard the best part yet. My brother at the weather station, he says the temperature patterns match the radio signals Barbara's friend recorded, and Steve here thinks both match the patterns in those construction blueprints Bill showed us yesterday." The coffee shop had grown quiet, all eyes now subtly turned toward Agent Gray. They realized with growing dread that this wasn't just random conversation anymore. "I need to make a call," Agent Gray said, hurrying toward the door. "Before you go," Barbara's voice was gentle but firm, "maybe you could explain why your coffee is still exactly 162.5 degrees Fahrenheit after 30 minutes. My grandson's a physics student, and he says that's technically impossible without some kind of external energy source." Agent Gray froze, their hand on the door. How had they missed such a basic detail? "And maybe explain those weird blue flashes we sometimes see in your eyes," Tom added, still smiling friendly as ever. "My sister's an optometrist, and she's never seen anything quite like it." The alien spy looked around the coffee shop, suddenly understanding. What they had mistaken for random chatter was actually an incredibly sophisticated intelligence-gathering network. These humans, with their endless questions and obsession with sharing odd observations, had unknowingly created a perfect system for detecting anomalies. Without another word, Agent Gray pushed through the door and disappeared down the street, leaving their still steaming coffee behind. "Well," Tom said to the quiet coffee shop, "I guess we should call my cousin Mike at the FBI now." Barbara was already dialing. "Already on it, dear. Amazing what you can learn just by chatting over coffee, isn't it?" Commander Void paced in their cloaked orbital ship, reading Agent Gray's latest report with increasing concern. The message was clear. Their perfect infiltration was somehow being compromised by humans gathering at a beverage dispensary. "This is impossible," Void muttered, their true form shifting with agitation. "How can casual conversation be defeating our most advanced concealment technology?" A series of urgent alerts flashed across their screens. Human activity had increased around 3 more preparation sites in the last hour alone. Even worse, their surveillance showed humans were now gathering in other coffee shops, restaurants, and parks across the city, talking and pointing at the sky. Meanwhile, at the daily grind, Tom was having a busy morning. "No sign of Gray today," he announced to the morning regulars. "But you won't believe what my cousin in the Air Force told me last night." Barbara looked up from her crossword puzzle. "The one stationed near that new weather research facility." "That's the one." Tom nodded, making her usual order. "Says they've been tracking some weird signals coming from orbit. Started right around the time our friend Gray stopped showing up." The door chimed as Bill the construction worker hurried in, looking excited. "Guys, remember those humming boxes I told you about? Well, my sister-in-law works at the physics lab, and she says they're putting out some kind of energy field. It matches those patterns Steve figured out from the cloud formations." Up in orbit, Commander Void watched the feeds with growing horror. Their planetary sensors showed information spreading across the human communication networks at an alarming rate. Somehow, these primitives were connecting dots that should have been impossible to connect. "Agent Gray," they opened the secure channel. "Report to base immediately. We must reassess our strategy." But Agent Gray didn't respond. Instead, a new alert popped up on Void's screen. Human military vehicles were now moving towards several key installation sites. Not in large numbers, that would be too obvious, but 1 or 2 at a time, as if they were just passing by. Back at the daily grind, Tom's phone buzzed. He grinned as he read the message. "Hey folks, my brother at the weather station says they're picking up some weird readings from space now. Kind of like what Janet heard on her radio, but bigger." Barbara nodded thoughtfully. "My granddaughter at the university says their telescope picked up something similar last night. Almost like there's something up there we can't see." "Command." A junior officer rushed into Void's chamber. "The humans are posting their observations on something called social media. The information is spreading exponentially." Void pulled up the human internet feeds. Their eyes widened in disbelief. Humans everywhere were sharing pictures of the geometric clouds, discussing the strange buildings, comparing notes about temperature patterns. What had started in one small coffee shop had somehow sparked a global conversation. "How?" Void demanded. "How are they coordinating this?" "Sir," the junior officer looked uncomfortable. "They're not. They're just talking. They call it making conversation, or small talk." In Seattle, Tom served another round of coffees as his customers shared their latest observations. None of them worked in intelligence. None of them were trying to uncover an alien invasion. They were just doing what humans had always done, noticing things and telling their friends about them. "Interesting fact," Barbara said, showing something on her tablet to Steve, the math teacher. "If you map out all the locations of those weird new buildings, they form a perfect geometric pattern. Kind of like those clouds we keep seeing." "Command." The junior officer's voice was barely a whisper now. I think they knew about us all along. They just kept talking about it like it was normal because that's what humans do." Void finished, watching the information continue to spread across the planet through countless casual conversations. They had prepared for human military resistance. They had planned for human technological defenses. But they had never considered their greatest weakness would be humanity's endless desire to chat about unusual things over coffee. Agent Gray sat in their hidden base beneath one of the new buildings, watching the surveillance feeds with growing dread. Their latest report to Commander Void had been simple. The humans know. On screen after screen, they watched the information spreading. What had started in the daily grind had become unstoppable. Tom's cousin in the Air Force had told his squad mates about the strange signals. The squad mates had mentioned it to their families. The families had talked to their friends. The friends had posted online. Agent Gray, Commander Void's voice crackled through their secure communicator. Explain how this happened. Gray watched as Barbara entered the coffee shop on their surveillance feed. Sir, I believe we made a serious error in our understanding of human communication patterns. On the screen, Barbara was showing something to the morning crowd. It looked like a map, with red dots marking all their hidden installation sites. She had simply connected the locations that her friends and family had mentioned over coffee. What do you mean, error? Void demanded. We studied their communication methods for years. Sir, we studied their formal communication, their military protocols, their government channels, their official networks. Gray watched as more people gathered around Barbara's map, but we never considered their informal networks. In the coffee shop, Tom was making calls. His brother at the weather station, his cousin in the military, his sister the optometrist. With each call, more pieces fell into place. Look at this, Steve the math teacher was saying, drawing patterns on a napkin. If these energy readings Barbara's friend recorded are correct, and we combine them with the temperature data Tom's brother collected, they're not even trying to hide their investigation. Void observed, watching the feeds. Why are they discussing classified information so openly? Because to them, it's not classified, Gray realized. It's just conversation, things they noticed, topics of interest. They don't even realize they're conducting an investigation. The surveillance feeds showed similar scenes playing out across the city. People in diners discussing the strange buildings. Kids at school sharing pictures of the geometric clouds. Workers at lunch comparing notes about weird energy readings. Command, a junior officer interrupted. We're detecting increased communications between human military bases. Finally, Void exclaimed. Now we'll see their real response. But when they pulled up the intercepted communications, it wasn't what they expected. Just more casual conversations. A soldier calling his mother, mentioning strange lights in the sky. A pilot texting her friend about weird radar readings. A technician chatting with his gaming group about unusual satellite data. This is impossible, Void muttered. Their entire response is based on gossip. Gray watched as Tom served more coffee, the conversation in the shop flowing naturally from weather patterns to energy readings to orbital anomalies. No one was giving orders. No one was following a protocol. They were just sharing what they knew, building a complete picture without even trying. Sir, Gray said quietly, I don't think we can stop this. Their social network. It's not a network we can hack or disable. It's just them, being human. On the screens, Barbara was now showing Tom's map to her granddaughter on a video call. The granddaughter was with her university research group. The research group had connections to government scientists. It's too late, Gray realized. They've already won, and they did it without even knowing they were fighting us. They did it over coffee and small talk. Commander Void was silent for a long moment. In the coffee shop, Tom was telling a new customer about the strange things happening around town, spreading the web of awareness even further. Prepare for emergency protocols, Void finally ordered. We must accelerate the timeline before. But Gray knew it was already too late. The humans had created something more powerful than any intelligence network their species had ever built. They had created a society where sharing information was as natural as breathing. And they had done it all through the simple act of small talk. The command center of the alien mothership was in chaos. Emergency alerts flashed across every screen as Commander Void received updates from their global network. Their perfect infiltration plan, developed over decades, was falling apart because humans couldn't stop talking to each other. Status report, Void demanded. Sir, the humans have mobilized military units near 47% of our installation sites, an officer reported. But they're being casual about it. They're calling it a training exercise. Meanwhile, at the daily grind, Tom was having an interesting morning. Military vehicles had been passing by regularly, but nobody seemed worried. If anything, The coffee shop was busier than ever. "More coffee, Barbara?" Tom asked, watching another unmarked government car drive past. "By the way, my cousin says they're doing some kind of special operation tonight. Says we might see some interesting lights in the sky." Barbara nodded, sliding her cup forward. "Oh yes, my granddaughter mentioned something about that. Her university's telescope will be pointed at those weather research buildings, just in case something happens." In orbit, Commander Void made a decision. "We must launch now, before they can fully organize." "Sir," Agent Gray's voice came through the comm system. "I don't think they need to organize. They already know exactly what we're doing. They're just waiting." "Impossible." Void slammed their appendage on the control panel. "They can't possibly know our exact plans." But on Earth, the evidence suggested otherwise. The Daily Grind's customers were calmly discussing what seemed like every detail of the alien operation. "You know what's funny?" Bill the construction worker said, showing something on his phone. "If you look at satellite images of those new buildings, they look exactly like landing pads." "Landing pads." Steve the math teacher peered at the phone. "That matches the energy output patterns we calculated. Perfect for stabilizing some kind of large spacecraft." Commander Void watched the feeds in horror. How do they know this?" "Sir," Agent Gray's voice was resigned. "Remember when I told you about Tom asking about the construction sites, and Barbara mentioning the radio signals, and Steve analyzing the patterns? They just talk to each other every day over coffee." On the screens, they watched as humans everywhere continued their routines. But now, they noticed the subtle signs. Military personnel casually positioned near every major installation, scientists happening to monitor key locations, civilians ready with their phones to record anything unusual. "Launch the attack," Void ordered. "Now. Before." "Sir," the junior officer interrupted. "Human military units are already in position around every single one of our hidden bases. They're not even trying to hide. They're having coffee breaks and chatting about their weekend plans." At the Daily Grind, Tom's phone buzzed. He read the message and smiled. "Hey folks, my brother says they're picking up some weird energy readings from orbit. Might want to stick around. Could be an interesting show tonight." Barbara glanced up from her crossword. "My friend at the radio station says the same thing. Something about a lot of activity up there." Commander Void watched in disbelief as their secret invasion force was effectively neutralized by humans who seemed more interested in their coffee than the impending alien attack. "Sir," Agent Gray's final report came through. "I believe we made a critical error. We thought their casual communication was a weakness. But it's their strength. They don't need a formal intelligence network. Their entire society is an intelligence network." The commander looked at their invasion fleet, now completely exposed and surrounded by casually positioned human defenses. All their careful planning, undone by humans who simply couldn't stop talking about interesting things they noticed. "Perhaps," Void said quietly, "we should have spent less time studying their weapons and more time studying their coffee shops." Down at the Daily Grind, Tom was serving another round of coffee as several military vehicles pulled up outside. Nobody seemed particularly concerned. They were too busy discussing whether anyone wanted to split a muffin while they waited for the evening's light show to begin. The sun was setting over Seattle, casting long shadows across the Daily Grind's windows. Inside, the coffee shop was unusually full for this time of day. Tom had even pulled out extra chairs as more people kept arriving, all of them casually glancing at the darkening sky every few minutes. "Your usual, Gray?" Tom asked as the alien spy walked in, looking defeated. Their disguise was less perfect now. There was a slight shimmer to their skin, and their eyes occasionally flashed that telltale blue. "You knew," Gray said quietly, accepting the coffee. "All of you knew, didn't you?" Barbara looked up from her crossword puzzle and smiled kindly. "Of course we knew, dear. You ordered your coffee at exactly 9:15 a.m. every day, down to the millisecond." Humans are rarely that precise. And you kept your coffee at exactly 162.5 degrees, Tom added, leaning on the counter. Plus, you never actually drank it. You just held it. Outside, more military vehicles were quietly taking up positions. None of the coffee shop customers seemed concerned. If anything, they looked amused. "But why didn't you stop me?" Gray asked, genuinely puzzled. "Why keep serving me coffee and talking to me if you knew what I was?" "Stop you?" Tom laughed. "Why would we? You were our best source of information. Every time we mentioned something strange, your reactions told us exactly what was important. We didn't even need to interrogate you," Barbara added. "We just had to mention weird weather patterns or strange buildings, and your tiny flinches told us everything we needed to know." In orbit, Commander Void watched the scene through Gray's optical feed with growing dismay. All this time, they were studying us while we thought we were studying them. "You know what your biggest mistake was?" Steve, the math teacher, spoke up. "You thought humans needed a formal system to share intelligence, but we've been gossiping and sharing observations since we invented language. It's what we do." Gray looked around the coffee shop, seeing it with new eyes. Every casual conversation, every shared observation, every bit of small talk had been part of a vast, unplanned intelligence operation, and they had walked right into it, day after day. "Your invasion fleet has exactly 30 minutes to leave Earth's orbit," Tom said cheerfully, starting to make another coffee. "My cousin in the military says they've got everything targeted, but they'd rather avoid the paperwork of an interstellar incident." Through the windows, they could see the geometric clouds beginning to break up as the alien atmospheric processors shut down one by one. In the distance, the strange new buildings were already being dismantled by crews who seemed to be treating it like any other demolition job. "How?" Gray asked. "How did you coordinate all this without any central command?" "Coordinate?" Barbara chuckled. "Oh, honey, we didn't coordinate anything. People just talked. That's what humans do. We notice things, we tell our friends, they tell their friends, and pretty soon everybody knows something's up. It's called social networking," Steve added, "but not the digital kind. The coffee shop kind." Gray's communicator buzzed. Commander Void's voice was resigned. "The fleet is withdrawing. Mission failed." Tom reached across the counter and patted Gray's hand sympathetically. "Don't feel too bad. You're not the first advanced civilization to underestimate the power of human small talk. Probably won't be the last either." "Would you like a muffin to go?" Tom offered. "Seems like you have a long trip ahead of you." As Gray left the daily grind for the last time, they could hear the conversations continuing behind them. People discussing weekend plans, sharing family news, and casually mentioning the alien ships now visible in the sky as they retreated. The greatest invasion force in the galaxy, defeated not by weapons or technology, but by humans who simply couldn't resist sharing interesting observations over coffee. Tom watched the alien ships disappear into the night sky and started cleaning up for closing time. "Same time tomorrow, everyone?" he asked his regulars. Barbara nodded, completing her crossword. "Of course, dear. You never know what interesting things might happen over coffee."